The massive creature lay dying in the depths of Kepler Station's abandoned mining sector, her once magnificent scales now dulled to the color of old copper. Zareth the Ancient had ruled the Draconian Empire for over 3 millennia, commanding fleets that could shatter planets and bend entire star systems to her will. Now she was nothing more than a fading legend, bleeding out in the darkness of human space. The station's residents whispered about her in hushed tones. How could something so powerful, so seemingly immortal, be brought so low? The answer lay in the betrayal of her own kind. The younger dragons, hungry for power and tired of the old ways, had used forbidden quantum weapons against her. The energy had corrupted her very essence, poisoning the ancient magic that kept her alive for eons. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the station's chief xenobiologist, had been studying Zareth for months. Every scan, every test, every consultation with the galaxy's greatest minds had led to the same conclusion. The ancient dragon was beyond saving. The quantum corruption was spreading through her massive form like cancer, eating away at the fundamental forces that sustained her existence. "There's nothing more we can do," Elena told Commander Harrison during their latest briefing. "The corruption has reached her neural pathways. Even if we could somehow purge the quantum energy, the damage to her brain is too extensive. She's essentially brain dead already." Harrison nodded grimly. The presence of a dying dragon on his station was causing political headaches across 3 sectors. The Draconian Empire wanted her back for a proper funeral. The Galactic Council was demanding answers about how she'd ended up in human space. And his own superiors were growing impatient with the resources being devoted to what they saw as a lost cause. But Zareth wasn't entirely alone. Hidden in the shadows of the mining tunnels, a small figure watched over the ancient dragon with fierce determination. Pip was barely the size of a house cat, her scales shifting between silver and blue depending on her mood. She was Zareth's youngest offspring, born just 50 years ago, practically an infant by dragon standards. The other dragons had written off both Pip and her dying mother. Dragon society was built on strength and power, and there was no room for sentiment when it came to the weak or dying. But Pip refused to abandon Zareth. She spent every moment she could beside the ancient dragon, speaking to her in the old tongue, sharing memories of better times. "The humans say you cannot hear me." "Mother," Pip whispered, her small voice echoing in the vast chamber. "But I know better. I feel your spirit still fighting, still hoping. There must be a way to save you. The humans are clever. They've surprised everyone before." Elena had tried to explain to Pip multiple times that her mother was beyond help, but the young dragon simply wouldn't accept it. There was something heartbreaking about watching such a small creature maintain hope in the face of impossible odds. The other station residents had begun avoiding the mining sector entirely, unable to bear witness to what they saw as a futile vigil. The corruption was visible now, spreading across Zareth's hide in ugly black veins that pulsed with sickly light. Her breathing had become labored, each breath a struggle that shook the station's superstructure. The medical bay's instruments showed her vital signs failing one by one. Yet somehow she clung to life. Pip had overheard the humans talking about their technology, their medicines, their scientific methods. She'd learned that humans were different from most species in the galaxy. Where others saw insurmountable problems, humans saw puzzles to be solved. Where others accepted defeat, humans found new ways to fight. "They call it the human spirit," she murmured to her mother. "Dr. Vasquez told me about it once. She said humans never give up even when logic says they should. Maybe that's what we need. Someone who doesn't know when to quit." The station's artificial gravity hummed softly around them, a constant reminder that they were surrounded by human engineering. Pip had always been fascinated by human technology. Unlike dragon magic, which relied on ancient knowledge and innate power, human science was built on curiosity and innovation. They took things apart to understand them, then put them back together in new and better ways. As she watched her mother struggle for each breath, Pip made a decision. The dragons had given up. The doctors had given up. Even the humans, for all their reputation for stubborn determination, had declared the situation hopeless. But Pip wouldn't give up. If there was even the smallest chance of saving Zareth, she would find it. The young dragon began to explore the station more thoroughly, listening to conversations, observing the humans at work. She learned about their workshops, their laboratories, their maintenance crews. Most importantly, She learned about the people who worked with their hands, who fixed things that seemed beyond repair. The mining sector had been abandoned for years, but the tunnels still echoed with the sounds of the station's operations. Pip could hear the distant hum of generators, the whisper of air recycling systems, the rhythmic clank of machinery. Each sound represented human ingenuity, human refusal to accept limitations. If anyone can save you, Mother, it will be one of them, Pip decided. Someone who looks at broken things and sees possibilities instead of problems. Someone who doesn't know enough to understand why something can't be fixed. She began to venture further from her mother's side, exploring the station's maintenance areas and workshops. The humans she encountered were initially startled by her presence. A dragon, even a tiny one, was not something they expected to find crawling through their workspaces. But Pip was careful to appear harmless and curious rather than threatening. The station's chief engineer, Marcus Chen, had tried to shoo her away from the main engineering bay several times. "This isn't a playground, little one," he'd said gently but firmly. "These machines are dangerous," but Pip persisted, watching and learning. She began to understand that humans had specialists for everything. People who worked only on engines, others who focused on electronics, still others who maintained the life support systems. Each person had their own area of expertise, their own way of approaching problems. As Zareth's condition continued to deteriorate, Pip's search became more desperate. She needed to find the right human, someone with the skills and determination to attempt the impossible. The fate of the ancient dragon, and perhaps the future of dragon-human relations, depended on her success. Jake Morrison was exactly the kind of person most people overlooked. He worked the night shift in Maintenance Bay 7, the furthest section from the station's main hub. While everyone else slept, Jake kept the forgotten corners of Kepler Station running. He fixed ancient air recyclers that hadn't been updated in decades, coaxed life from obsolete power couplings, and somehow managed to keep equipment working long past its expiration date. The other mechanics called him crazy. Jake had a reputation for taking on projects that made no sense, repairing machines that were cheaper to replace, finding solutions that violated standard protocols, refusing to give up on equipment that everyone else had written off as junk. His workshop was filled with spare parts from a dozen different species technologies, jury-rigged devices that shouldn't work but somehow did, and half-finished projects that would have horrified a proper engineer. "Morrison's got magic hands," Chief Engineer Chen often said, though he usually followed it with a warning about proper safety procedures. Jake's methods were unorthodox, his workspace was chaotic, and his reports were often illegible. But things worked when Jake fixed them, sometimes better than they had when they were new. On the night that would change everything, Jake was wrestling with a particularly stubborn atmospheric processor in Section C. The machine was a hybrid of human and Centaurian technology that had been jury-rigged with Martian components during the war. No two parts were meant to work together, yet somehow the whole system had been limping along for 15 years. Now it was finally giving up, and Jake was the only person on the station willing to try saving it. "Come on, you stubborn piece of junk," Jake muttered, elbow deep in the machine's guts. "I know you've got more fight left in you." That's when he heard the soft scraping sound behind him. Jake turned to find a small dragon watching him from the workshop's entrance. He'd seen her before, of course. Everyone on the station knew about the little dragon who refused to leave her dying mother's side. But this was the first time she'd ventured into his territory. "Hey there, little one," Jake said softly, not wanting to startle her. "You're pretty far from the mining sector. Everything okay?" Pip studied the human carefully. He was covered in grease and wore a patched jumpsuit that had seen better days. His workshop was a disaster by any normal standard, but she could see the underlying organization in the chaos. This was someone who understood machines in a way that went beyond textbook knowledge. "I need your help," Pip said simply. Jake nearly dropped his plasma cutter. He'd known the little dragon could talk. All dragons could. But hearing that small voice speak with such determination was jarring. More jarring still was the request itself. What could a dragon possibly need from a grease monkey like him? "What kind of help?" Jake asked, setting down his tools and giving Pip his full attention. "Everyone says my mother cannot be saved. The doctors, the scientists, even your Commander Harrison, they all say the quantum corruption is too advanced, that her brain is damaged beyond repair." Pip's voice was steady, but Jake could hear the pain beneath the words. but I've been watching humans. You don't accept impossible the way others do. Jake felt his heart sink. He'd heard about the ancient dragon, of course. The whole station knew she was dying, and he'd felt genuinely sorry for the little dragon who refused to give up hope. But this was way beyond anything he could help with. Kid, I appreciate the faith, but I'm just a maintenance guy. I fix air recyclers and power conduits, not living beings, especially not beings with quantum corruption. Jake gestured helplessly at his workshop. This is all just mechanical stuff. But Pip stepped closer, her silver-blue scales shimmering in the workshop's harsh lighting. Dr. Vasquez told me something interesting. She said the quantum corruption isn't just affecting my mother's biology. It's interfering with the energy patterns that dragons use for what you call magic. She said it's almost like a machine malfunction, but in living tissue. Jake frowned. He'd worked on quantum energy systems before, though never anything involving living beings. The principles weren't that different from the exotic matter converters he maintained in the lower sectors, but the complexity of applying those principles to a living creature, especially one as massive and ancient as a dragon. Even if that's true, Jake said carefully, I wouldn't know where to begin. Dragons and machines are completely different things. Are they? Pip asked. I've been studying human technology since I arrived here. Your machines process energy, store information, repair damage, maintain complex systems. Dragons do all the same things, just with biological processes instead of mechanical ones. Jake stared at the small dragon, his mind racing. It was an interesting way to think about it, but the gulf between fixing a broken atmospheric processor and healing a dying dragon seemed insurmountable. Pip seemed to sense his hesitation. Will you at least look at her? Dr. Vasquez has all the medical scans, all the data about the corruption patterns. Maybe you'll see something the others missed. I really don't think... Please. The word came out small and desperate, and Jake felt his resolve crumble. He'd never been good at saying no to someone who needed help, even when the help seemed impossible to provide. Against his better judgment, Jake found himself following Pip through the station's maintenance tunnels toward the mining sector. The little dragon moved with surprising grace through the narrow passages, clearly familiar with the route. As they walked, she told him more about her mother, how Zareth had ruled fairly for millennia, how she'd tried to modernize dragon society, how the younger generation had betrayed her for refusing to embrace their more aggressive expansion plans. She believed that dragons could learn from other species instead of just conquering them, Pip explained. The others saw that as weakness. When they finally reached the vast chamber where Zareth lay dying, Jake had to stop and catch his breath. The ancient dragon was enormous, easily the size of a small starship, but it was the corruption that truly shocked him. The black veins pulsing across her hide looked disturbingly familiar. I've seen this before, Jake whispered, moving closer despite himself. The corruption pattern reminded him of cascade failures in quantum resonance chambers, a specific type of breakdown that happened when exotic matter systems were forced to operate beyond their design parameters. The same ugly black spreading, the same pulsing energy discharges, the same systematic shutdown of connected systems. You have? Pip asked excitedly. Jake nodded slowly, his engineer's mind already working on the problem. It looks like a cascade failure. I've seen it in quantum processing arrays when they're overloaded. The corruption spreads through the energy pathways, shutting down one system after another until the whole array goes dark. He walked around Zareth's massive form, studying the corruption patterns with growing interest. This wasn't just random damage, there was a logic to it, a predictable progression that followed the dragon's energy channels the same way cascade failures followed power conduits. The thing about cascade failures, Jake said thoughtfully, is that they're not usually permanent. The systems shut down to protect themselves from further damage. Sometimes you can restart them if you approach the problem correctly. For the first time in months, Pip felt a spark of real hope. This human was looking at her mother, the way he might look at a broken machine, not with sympathy or resignation, but with genuine curiosity about how things worked and how they might be fixed. How do you restart them? Pip asked breathlessly. Jake was quiet for a long moment, studying the patterns of corruption. You isolate the cascade, drain the corrupted energy, and then slowly bring the systems back online one by one. It's tricky and you only get one shot at it, but it can work. He turned to look at Pip, and she could see the dangerous spark of an impossible idea forming behind his eyes. I'd need to study those medical scans, understand exactly how dragon energy systems work, and we'd need equipment that probably doesn't exist. But maybe, Pip prompted. Jake grinned, the expression of a man who'd just been presented with the most interesting engineering challenge of his life. Maybe your mother isn't dying. Maybe she's just crashed, and we need to figure out how to reboot a dragon. Dr. Elena Vasquez thought Jake Morrison had completely lost his mind. She stood in her medical bay, staring at the maintenance worker who had just suggested they treat a dying dragon like a broken machine, and wondered if the stress of the situation had finally gotten to everyone on the station. Let me get this straight, Elena said slowly. You want me to hand over months of sensitive medical data to a mechanic so he can, what, change Zareth's oil and replace her spark plugs? Jake winced at the sarcasm but pressed on. I know how it sounds, Doc, but I've been looking at your corruption patterns all night and they're identical to cascade failures I've seen in quantum processing systems. The energy pathways, the shutdown sequence, even the way the corruption spreads, it's all following the same logic. Elena pulled up a holographic display of Zareth's neural scans. These are brain activity readings, Jake, neural pathways. Living tissue that's been damaged by exotic quantum energy. You can't just reset a brain like it's a computer. Why not? The question came from Pip, who had been quietly watching the exchange from a corner of the medical bay. Humans use computers to think. You store memories in databanks, process information through circuits, even repair damaged neural pathways with cybernetic implants. How is that different from what we're suggesting? Elena looked between Jake and Pip, feeling like she was being tag-teamed by optimists. Because biological systems are infinitely more complex than any computer we've ever built. The human brain alone has over 80 billion neurons, each connected to thousands of others. A dragon's brain is exponentially more complicated, but they still follow patterns, right? Jake insisted. Energy flows through specific pathways. Information is stored in organized structures. Damage spreads according to predictable rules. Those are engineering principles, Doc. I work with systems like that every day. Elena was about to explain why he was wrong when something in Jake's expression stopped her. This wasn't the desperate optimism of someone clinging to false hope. This was the focused intensity of an engineer who had identified a real problem and was working toward a real solution. Show me, Elena said finally. Jake activated his portable holoprojector, overlaying his own technical diagrams onto Elena's medical scans. Look at this, he said, highlighting specific areas. The corruption follows the dragon's major energy channels. What you call neural pathways, I call primary conduits. It spreads from high-activity areas to low-activity areas, just like a power surge through an electrical system. Elena studied the overlay, her medical training warring with what she was seeing. The pattern was undeniable, but the implications were staggering. Even if you're right about the pattern, Elena said, how would you propose to fix it? Dragons don't have reset buttons, Jake. Actually, they might, Pip said quietly. Ancient dragons can enter dormancy states that last for centuries. During dormancy, our energy systems cycle down to minimal levels while our bodies repair themselves. It's not exactly the same as turning off a machine, but it serves a similar purpose. Jake's eyes lit up. That's it. A controlled shutdown. If we could force Zareth into a deeper dormancy state than she's ever experienced before, her systems might be able to purge the corrupted energy naturally. Elena shook her head. The corruption has already damaged her neural tissue. Even if you could somehow drain the quantum energy, the physical damage would remain. Would it, though? Jake challenged. Dragons are basically living quantum computers, right? They manipulate energy and matter at the molecular level. If their brains are anything like quantum processing cores, they might have built-in error correction and self-repair capabilities that we don't understand. The conversation was interrupted by Commander Harrison's arrival. The station commander looked haggard, like he hadn't slept in days. Dr. Vasquez, I need an update on the dragon's condition. The Draconian Empire is sending a funeral fleet, and I need to know when. He stopped mid-sentence when he noticed Jake. Morrison? What are you doing here? Jake has a theory about Zareth's condition, Elena said carefully. He believes the quantum corruption might be treatable. Harrison's expression cycled through several emotions before settling on skeptical resignation. Morrison, I appreciate your... initiative, but this isn't a malfunctioning air recycler. This is a dying member of one of the galaxy's most powerful species. With respect, sir, Jake said. Dying systems are still systems, and systems can be repaired if you understand how they work. Before Harrison could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the medical bay. Elena rushed to her monitoring station, her face going pale as she read the displays. She's crashing, Elena announced. Total neural collapse. We're losing her. In the mining sector, Zareth's massive form convulsed as the corruption finally reached her brainstem. The black veins pulsed brighter, and the ancient dragon's breathing became erratic. Pip darted from the medical bay, racing through the station's corridors toward her dying mother. We're out of time, Harrison said grimly. Morrison, I'm sorry, but whatever you had in mind— No, Jake interrupted, already heading for the door. If she's crashing, then we need to act now. Elena? I need those medical scans and a portable quantum scanner. Commander, I need access to the station's main power grid. Jake, you could kill her, Elena warned. She's already dying, Jake shot back. Right now, she's in the final stages of cascade failure. In about 10 minutes, the corruption will reach her core brain functions and she'll be gone forever. But if we can force a hard shutdown before that happens, we might be able to save the uncorrupted portions of her neural matrix. Harrison looked between Jake and Elena, weighing options that all seemed terrible. What exactly are you proposing? I'm going to overload her energy systems, Jake said, pulling on his work gloves. Create a feedback loop that forces every quantum process in her body to shut down simultaneously. It's essentially giving a dragon the technological equivalent of a massive heart attack. That's insane, Elena breathed. So is watching her die when we might be able to save her, Jake replied. Pip believes in this. She's the only one who really knows her mother. If she thinks Zareth is strong enough to survive a forced reboot, then I'm willing to try. The medical bay fell silent except for the continued blaring of alarms. Finally, Harrison nodded. Do it. But Morrison, if this goes wrong, if you somehow make things worse, the consequences will be on both our heads. Jake was already running toward the maintenance shafts, Elena's medical scanner in one hand and his toolkit in the other. Behind him, he could hear Elena gathering emergency medical equipment and Harrison issuing rapid orders to the station's engineering staff. As he raced through the tunnels, Jake's mind was already working through the technical challenges ahead. He would need to tap into the station's main power grid without causing a station-wide blackout. He would need to modulate the energy feedback precisely enough to force dormancy without causing permanent damage. Most importantly, he would need to time everything perfectly. Too soon and the corruption would just resume spreading. Too late, and there wouldn't be enough of Zareth's mind left to save. When Jake reached the mining sector, he found Pip curled against her mother's massive head, speaking softly in the ancient dragon tongue. Zareth's breathing was barely detectable now, and the corruption had spread to cover most of her body. I'm here, Jake announced, dropping his equipment and beginning to set up his improvised medical workshop. Pip, I need you to tell me everything you know about dragon dormancy cycles. And I mean everything. How deep can your mother go? How long can she stay under? What happens to her consciousness during dormancy? As Pip began to explain the mysteries of dragon biology, Jake started connecting cables and calibrating instruments. In a few minutes, he would attempt something that had never been tried before. Restarting a dying dragon like she was a broken machine. The question wasn't whether it would work. The question was whether any of them would survive the attempt. The improvised medical setup in the mining chamber looked like something from a mad scientist's laboratory. Jake had rigged quantum resonance coils to medical monitoring equipment, patched power cables directly into the station's main grid, and somehow connected Elena's bioscanners to his own jury-rigged diagnostic tools. Sparks flew from several connections, and the whole assembly hummed with dangerous energy. This is completely against every safety protocol ever written, Elena muttered as she helped Jake position the resonance coils around Zareth's massive head. If Chief Engineer Chen could see this setup, he'd have us all thrown in the brig. Chen's the one who taught me that sometimes you have to break the rules to fix what's really broken, Jake replied, fine-tuning the energy output calibrators. Besides, we're not exactly working with standard equipment here. Commander Harrison stood at a safe distance, monitoring communications with the bridge. The Draconian funeral fleet just entered our sensor range. ETA 47 minutes. Whatever you're going to do, Morrison, you need to do it fast. Pip remained close to her mother's head, one small claw resting gently on Zarath's snout. The ancient dragon's breathing had become so shallow it was almost undetectable, and the corruption veins pulsed with an angry light that suggested the final cascade was imminent. "Jake," Elena said urgently, reading her bioscanners. "Her neural activity is dropping below critical thresholds. We're losing the higher brain functions. How long do we have?" Jake asked, not looking up from his equipment. "Minutes, maybe less." Jake's hands flew over the controls, making final adjustments to the power distribution matrix. The plan was theoretically simple. Overload Zarath's quantum energy systems with a massive power surge, forcing every corrupted pathway to shut down simultaneously. The uncorrupted portions of her neural matrix should automatically enter deep dormancy to protect themselves, while the corrupted energy would discharge harmlessly into the station's power grid. In practice, it was the most dangerous thing Jake had ever attempted. Too little power, and the corruption would simply absorb the energy and spread faster. Too much power and they would literally fry Zarath's brain. The margin for error was essentially zero. "Pip," Jake said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "I need you to talk to your mother. Tell her what we're trying to do. If any part of her consciousness is still aware, she needs to be ready for this." The small dragon nodded and leaned closer to Zarath's massive head. She began speaking in the ancient dragon tongue, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate through the chamber itself. Jake couldn't understand the words, but he could feel the love and desperation behind them. "Power grid is standing by," Commander Harrison reported. "All non-essential systems have been shut down. You'll have access to the full output of the station's main reactor." Elena was monitoring Zarath's vital signs on a dozen different displays. "Neural cascade has reached the brainstem. Jake, if you're going to do this, it has to be now." Jake took a deep breath and placed his hand on the main power control. Everything he'd learned in 15 years of fixing impossible machines had led to this moment. Every jury-rigged repair, every time he'd made something work when everyone else said it couldn't, every stubborn refusal to accept that something was beyond fixing, it all came down to this: initiating power surge in 3, 2, 1. The chamber erupted in light and sound as massive electrical discharges arced between the resonance coils. Zarath's body convulsed as quantum energy flooded through her corrupted neural pathways, creating a feedback loop that screamed through every circuit Jake had rigged. Alarms blared as the station's power grid strained under the massive draw. For several terrifying seconds it looked like Jake had simply electrocuted the ancient dragon. Zarath's massive form writhed as energy cascaded through her body, and the corruption veins flared so brightly they hurt to look at. Then suddenly everything went dark. The power surge had shut down automatically just as Jake had programmed it to. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting eerie shadows across the chamber. For a long moment nobody moved. Zarath lay perfectly still, her massive chest no longer rising and falling. "Did it work?" Pip asked in a small voice. Elena frantically checked her scanners, but the readings were confusing. "I'm not getting any neural activity, but that might be normal for deep dormancy. Her cellular metabolism has dropped to almost nothing. It's like she's in suspended animation." Jake was studying his own diagnostic equipment, looking for any sign that the corruption had been purged. Slowly a grin spread across his grease-stained face. "Look at this," he said, pointing to his quantum resonance display. "The corrupted energy signatures are gone. Whatever quantum poison was in her system, we just flushed it out." "But is she alive?" Commander Harrison asked. That was the question they all feared to ask. Jake's plan had been based on the hope that dragons could survive deeper dormancy than anyone had ever recorded. If he was wrong, if the power surge had been too much for Zarath's ancient physiology, then he hadn't saved her. He'd simply killed her in a different way. "We wait," Elena said finally. According to Pip, dragons can remain in dormancy for decades or even centuries. There's no way to know if the procedure worked until she decides to wake up. "The funeral fleet isn't going to wait decades," Harrison pointed out. Before anyone could respond, they heard footsteps in the tunnel outside. Chief Engineer Chen appeared, flanked by 2 security officers and looking thoroughly annoyed. "Morrison," Chen barked. "What did you do to my power grid?" Half the station went dark, and the reactor output readings are showing impossible spikes. "I've got damage reports from 6 different sections." Jake held up his hands peacefully. "It was a controlled overload, Chief. Everything should be back to normal parameters now." Controlled? Chen gestured at the chaotic array of equipment surrounding Zarath. This looks like someone tried to jury-rig a warp core with spare parts and good intentions. And why are there scorch marks on the walls? Because we just attempted to restart a dragon's brain, Elena said dryly. Standard medical procedures don't really apply. Chen stared at Elena, then at Jake, then at the motionless form of Zarath. You tried to what now? Long story, Jake said. The short version is that we think the ancient dragon was suffering from something like a cascade failure in her neural matrix. So we forced a hard reboot. You rebooted a dragon, Chen repeated flatly. We tried to, Pip corrected. We won't know if it worked until Mother wakes up. Chen looked like he was developing a headache. Morrison, in all my years as an engineer, I have never heard of anything so completely insane. You could have killed her. You could have blown up the station. You could have, Chief, Jake interrupted gently. She was dying anyway. At least now there's hope. Before Chen could respond, Commander Harrison's communicator crackled to life. Bridge to Commander Harrison. Sir, the Draconian funeral fleet is requesting permission to dock. Their leader wants to speak with you immediately. Harrison looked around the chamber at the mix of human technology and dragon physiology, at the evidence of their desperate gamble to save a life that everyone else had given up for lost. Tell them we're still working on the situation, Harrison said finally, and that it's complicated. As the humans and Pip settled in to wait and monitor Zarath's condition, none of them noticed the small changes already beginning to occur. Deep within the ancient dragon's dormant neural matrix, uncorrupted pathways were slowly beginning to establish new connections. Her immune system, no longer fighting the quantum poison, was starting to repair damaged tissue. Most importantly, in the deepest levels of her consciousness where instinct and memory resided, Zarath was beginning to dream, and for the first time in months, those dreams were not filled with pain and corruption, but with curiosity about the strange small beings who had somehow found a way to heal what her own kind had declared unhealable. The Draconian funeral fleet was unlike anything the crew of Kepler Station had ever seen. 12 massive vessels that looked more like living creatures than ships hung in space just beyond the station's defense perimeter. Each ship was the size of a small moon, their hulls covered in scales that shifted color in the starlight. At their head was the flagship Death's Honor, commanded by Zarath the Younger, Zarath's own nephew and one of the leaders of the rebellion that had brought down the ancient dragon. Commander Harrison stood in his ready room, facing the holographic image of a dragon that towered over him even in miniature. Zarath was everything the humans expected from a dragon lord, arrogant, powerful, and utterly convinced of his own superiority. His scales were deep crimson edged with gold, and his eyes burned with barely contained fury. Human, Zarath's voice rumbled through the station's communication system. You will surrender the body of Zarath the Ancient immediately. Her funeral rites must be performed according to the old ways, and every moment you delay dishonors her memory. With respect, Lord Zarath, Harrison replied carefully. The situation is more complicated than your sources may have indicated. Zarath is not dead. She's in a deep healing trance, and we have reason to believe she may recover. The holographic dragon's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. Impossible. My ships detected the quantum corruption from 3 star systems away. Nothing can survive that level of contamination. Your doctors confirmed this months ago. Our doctors were working with incomplete information, Harrison said. We've discovered that the corruption follows patterns similar to technological cascade failures. We've developed a treatment that may be effective. Zarath's eyes narrowed dangerously. You dare suggest that human medicine can succeed where dragon healing has failed? Your species has existed for mere millennia. We have conquered galaxies while your ancestors were still crawling in caves. In the mining chamber, Jake was monitoring Zarath's condition with equipment that had been modified so many times, it barely resembled its original configuration. Elena worked alongside him, taking regular bioscans and recording the ancient dragon's incredibly slow but steady vital signs. Any change? Pip asked for the 100th time that day. Her cellular metabolism is actually increasing, Elena reported. Very slowly, but it's definitely trending upward. Whatever Jake did, her body is responding. Jake was more interested in the quantum resonance readings. The interesting thing is how her neural pathways are reorganizing themselves. Look at this pattern. It's like her brain is rebuilding damaged connections using alternative routes. I've seen similar adaptations in quantum computers after they've been rebooted from cascade failures. Chief Engineer Chen arrived with a fresh pot of coffee and a worried expression. Morrison, I've been reviewing the power consumption data from your little experiment. The energy requirements for maintaining your treatment are enormous. If you try something like this again, you'll need to take the entire station offline. Hopefully we won't need to try it again, Jake said. But Chen, I've been thinking about what we learned here. If dragon physiology really does work like biological quantum computing, there might be applications for human medicine too. Imagine if we could treat neural damage the same way we fix corrupted data systems. Their conversation was interrupted by a rumbling voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Such strange dreams you have given me, small builder of impossible things. Everyone in the chamber froze. Zareth's eyes remained closed, her massive form still motionless, but her voice filled the space around them with a resonance that made their bones vibrate. Mother, Pip whispered. I am here, little flame. Zareth replied, her mental voice warm with affection. Though I find myself in a place I have never been before. It is quiet here, peaceful, the pain is gone. Elena frantically checked her medical scanners. I'm not reading any external neural activity. She's somehow communicating while still in deep dormancy. The corruption, Jake asked urgently. Is it gone? There was a long pause before Zareth answered. The poison has been flushed away. That is an apt description, small engineer. You approached my illness as you would approach a malfunctioning machine, and in doing so, you found a solution that eluded physicians and healers who have studied for centuries. Before anyone could respond, Commander Harrison's voice crackled over the comm system. All hands, this is the bridge. The Draconian fleet is powering weapons. I need Dr. Vasquez, Morrison, and Pip in the command center immediately. The journey to the bridge felt surreal. They were rushing to prevent an interstellar incident, while simultaneously monitoring the first successful treatment of quantum corruption in recorded history. Jake found himself wondering if this was how all major medical breakthroughs felt. Equal parts triumph and terror. The bridge was a scene of controlled chaos. Officers manned battle stations while tactical displays showed the massive Draconian ships moving into attack formation. Commander Harrison looked up as they entered. Zareth is demanding proof that Zareth is alive, Harrison explained. He refuses to believe our medical reports and insists that we're lying to delay the funeral rites. He's given us 1 hour to produce evidence, or he'll take Zareth's body by force. Can we establish a communication link? Elena asked. If Zareth can speak to him directly, I already suggested that, Harrison replied. Zareth claims that any communication could be faked. He wants to see her awake and moving. That could take days or even weeks, Jake protested. We don't know how long the recovery process will take. Pip had been quietly listening to the conversation, but now she spoke up. There might be another way. Ancient dragons can share consciousness across vast distances. If Mother is truly healing, she should be able to establish a mental link with Zareth that he would recognize as genuine. Can she do that while still in dormancy? Elena asked. I don't know, Pip admitted. It's never been tried before. But then, nothing about the situation has ever been tried before. Harrison nodded grimly. Morrison, can you rig some kind of communication array that might boost the signal? If there's even a chance of avoiding a battle. Jake was already thinking about the problem. I'd need to modify the quantum resonance coils. Maybe create a field that amplifies psychic energy. It's theoretical at best, but I might be able to put something together. You have 30 minutes, Harrison said. After that, we'll have 12 dragon warships shooting at us. And our shields won't last long against that kind of firepower. As they raced back toward the mining chamber, Jake's mind was spinning with possibilities. He'd already performed one impossible repair today. Apparently, dragon neurology responded to engineering principles in ways no one had expected. Now he was being asked to build a communication device based on technology he didn't understand, to boost signals he couldn't detect, for a species that treated him like a clever pet. But as he looked at Pip's desperate expression, Jake realized that none of those challenges mattered. He was an engineer, and engineers solved problems. The fact that this particular problem involved alien psychic networks and interstellar politics was just another variable to account for. Pip, Jake said as they reached the maintenance tunnels, I need to know everything you can tell me about dragon mental communication. Frequency ranges, energy patterns, anything that might help me build an amplifier. Behind them, alarms continued to blare as the station prepared for possible battle. Ahead of them lay the ancient dragon, slowly healing in her technological cocoon while her own people prepared to wage war over her apparently lifeless body. Jake began pulling tools from his kit, already visualizing the modifications he would need to make. 30 minutes to prevent an interstellar war, and prove that human ingenuity could succeed where alien wisdom had failed. Just another day in the life of a maintenance engineer. Jake's improvised psychic amplifier looked like a cross between a radio telescope and a piece of abstract art. He'd taken the quantum resonance coils from his earlier setup, wired them to a collection of signal boosters scavenged from the station's communication array, and somehow integrated the whole assembly with Elena's biomonitoring equipment. Cables snaked across the floor in patterns that would have given a safety inspector nightmares. "This is either brilliant or completely insane," Elena muttered as she helped Jake make final adjustments to the biosensors. "Possibly both." "Story of my life," Jake replied, calibrating the signal amplification matrix. "Pip, I need you to help your mother understand what we're trying to do. If she can focus her mental energy through these resonance points, the amplifiers should boost her psychic signal enough to reach the fleet." The small dragon nodded and moved closer to Zarath's massive head. The ancient dragon had been more responsive over the past hour, occasionally speaking to them in her deep, resonant mental voice. Her physical body remained in deep dormancy, but her consciousness seemed to be growing stronger. "Mother," Pip said softly, "we need you to try reaching Uncle Zarath. The humans have built a device that should help amplify your thoughts across space." Zarath's mental voice carried a note of amusement. "Such strange allies you have found for us, little flame. This Jake treats my mind like one of his broken machines, and yet his approach has succeeded where centuries of dragon wisdom failed." On the bridge, Commander Harrison watched the tactical display with growing tension. The Draconian ships had moved into perfect attack formation, their weapons powered and targeting the station's critical systems. 23 minutes had passed since Zarath's ultimatum. "Sir," the tactical officer reported, "long-range sensors are detecting energy buildups in their main weapon arrays. They're preparing to fire. Any word from the mining section?" Harrison asked. "Morrison reports they're ready to attempt communication," the communications officer replied. "But he can't guarantee the system will work." Harrison nodded grimly. "Tell him he's got one shot at this. If it doesn't work, we evacuate the civilian sections and prepare for combat." In the mining chamber, Jake activated his jury-rigged amplifier array. The resonance coils hummed to life, creating a field of quantum energy that made the air itself seem to vibrate. His instruments showed massive power draws as the system boosted Zarath's naturally occurring psychic emanations and focused them toward the distant fleet. "I can feel it," Zarath said, her mental voice taking on a note of concentration. "The connection is forming. Zarath, nephew, can you hear me?" For a long moment there was no response. Then suddenly the chamber filled with a different mental presence, younger, more aggressive, and absolutely stunned. "Aunt Zarath?" Zarath's mental voice was barely a whisper. "But you are dead. The corruption, the cascade failure. My healers said it was impossible to survive." "Your healers were correct, nephew. By dragon standards, my condition was indeed terminal. But these humans do not limit themselves to dragon standards." Jake could feel the intensity of the mental connection, like standing too close to a powerful electrical field. His amplifiers were working overtime to maintain the link across interstellar distances, and several warning lights were blinking ominously on his control panels. "Explain," Zarath demanded, his mental voice carrying undertones of disbelief and growing anger. "How can humans accomplish what our greatest healers could not?" "Because they think differently than we do," Zarath replied. "Where our healers saw an incurable disease, these humans saw a technical malfunction. Where we saw the irreversible corruption of living tissue, they saw patterns similar to failures in their quantum computers." Through the psychic link, Jake could sense Zarath's growing fury. The young dragon lord had led a rebellion partly based on the belief that dragons were inherently superior to all other species. The idea that mere humans could succeed where dragon expertise had failed threatened his entire worldview. "Impossible," Zarath snarled. "You are deceiving me, or these humans have deceived you. No lesser species possesses such capabilities." "Lesser species?" Zarath's mental voice took on the dangerous edge that had once made her the most feared ruler in 3 galaxies. Nephew, it is precisely that arrogance that led to your rebellion in the first place. You and the others could not accept that we might have something to learn from younger races. Jake's amplifier array was beginning to show signs of strain. Several components were overheating and the power draw was reaching dangerous levels. But the connection between the two dragons remained strong, allowing their conversation to continue in real time across the vast distance. Even if what you claim is true, Zareth said, you are still dying. The corruption may be gone, but you remain in dormancy. You cannot rule in such a state. I am healing, Zareth corrected. The human's treatment has purged the quantum poison from my system and allowed my natural regenerative abilities to resume their work. In time I will wake. How much time? Zareth asked suspiciously. There was a pause before Zareth answered. I do not know. Days, perhaps weeks. The damage was extensive, and my body requires time to rebuild what was lost. Jake could sense Zareth's internal conflict through the psychic link. The Dragon Lord had come expecting to collect a corpse and had instead found his supposedly dead aunt speaking to him from beyond the grave. Everything he thought he knew about dragon superiority and human limitations had just been thrown into question. I will not wait weeks, Zareth declared finally. The Empire requires leadership now, not promises of future recovery. Then perhaps, Zareth said quietly, the Empire needs to reconsider what kind of leadership it requires. Before Zareth could respond, Jake's amplifier array finally reached its breaking point. Several components failed simultaneously, sending showers of sparks across the chamber. The psychic connection cut out abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. That's it, Jake announced, shutting down the remaining systems before they could cause more damage. The amplifiers are fried. We won't be able to re-establish contact. Elena was monitoring Zareth's vital signs, looking worried. The effort seems to have exhausted her. Her neural activity has dropped back to minimal levels. Pip looked between the smoking remains of Jake's equipment and her mother's motionless form. Will that be enough? Did Uncle Zareth believe what he heard? Before anyone could answer, Commander Harrison's voice crackled over the comm system. Mining section, this is the bridge. The Draconian ships are powering down their weapons. Repeat, they are standing down from attack positions. Jake slumped against one of his ruined control panels, exhausted but relieved. I guess it worked. But their celebration was short-lived. Harrison's voice returned, carrying a new note of tension. However, Lord Zareth is demanding to meet with the medical team responsible for treating Zareth. He's coming aboard the station with a full honor guard, and he doesn't sound happy. Elena and Jake exchanged glances. They had successfully prevented an immediate battle, but they were about to face something potentially more dangerous. A Dragon Lord who had just discovered that his fundamental beliefs about species superiority had been proven wrong. Well, Jake said, looking at the wreckage of his amplifier array, I guess we're about to find out if saving a dragon's life counts for anything when her nephew wants to discuss human-dragon relations. In the distance, the massive form of Zareth's personal shuttle began its approach to Kepler Station, carrying a Dragon Lord whose worldview had just been shattered by a maintenance worker and a stubborn refusal to accept the impossible. The docking bay had never hosted anything like Zareth's shuttle. The craft was easily the size of a small cruiser, its hull covered in the same living metal scales as the larger fleet ships. When the boarding ramp lowered, it revealed an honor guard of 6 warrior dragons in full ceremonial armor, followed by Zareth himself. The Dragon Lord was even more imposing in person than he had been as a hologram, nearly 15 feet tall in his humanoid form. With scales that shifted between deep crimson and molten gold depending on his mood, Zareth carried himself with the absolute confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved through superior firepower. Commander Harrison led the reception committee, flanked by station security and trying to project calm authority, despite facing beings that could literally tear the station apart with their bare claws. Behind them stood Dr. Vasquez, Jake Morrison, and Pip, the unlikely medical team that had somehow accomplished the impossible. Lord Zareth, Harrison said formally, welcome to Kepler Station. I'm Commander Harrison, and these are the individuals responsible for treating your aunt's condition. Zareth's burning gaze swept over the humans, lingering on Jake's grease-stained jumpsuit and battered toolkit. This is the mechanic who claims to have cured quantum corruption. Jake Morrison, sir, Jake replied, meeting the dragon's stare despite feeling like a mouse confronting a lion. And I didn't cure anything. I just helped your aunt reboot her neural system so her own healing abilities could do their job. Reboot. Zareth repeated the word like it was something distasteful. You speak of my aunt, one of the most ancient and powerful beings in the galaxy, as if she were a malfunctioning computer. With respect, Lord Zareth, Elena interjected. That's exactly what made the treatment possible. Jake approached the problem without preconceived notions about what was or wasn't possible. He saw patterns that our medical training had taught us to overlook. Zareth turned his attention to Elena, his expression slightly less hostile. You are the physician? Dr. Elena Vasquez, Chief of Xenobiology. I've been monitoring Zareth's condition for months. Every conventional treatment failed. Every consultation with galactic medical experts led to the same conclusion. The corruption was irreversible. And yet this mechanic succeeded where trained healers failed. Jake could hear the struggle in Zareth's voice. The Dragon Lord was trying to reconcile his fundamental beliefs about species hierarchy with the undeniable evidence that humans had accomplished something dragons could not. Maybe that's the point, Jake said quietly. I'm not trained in dragon physiology, so I didn't know what was supposed to be impossible. I just saw a system that was malfunctioning and tried to fix it the same way I'd fix any other broken machine. Before Zareth could respond, a small voice piped up from behind the humans. Uncle Zareth. You need to see Mother. Pip stepped forward. Her tiny form dwarfed by the massive dragons around her, but there was no fear in her posture, only the determination that had driven her to refuse giving up hope when everyone else had accepted defeat. Little Pip. Zareth's voice softened slightly. I had hoped to spare you the sight of what we believed was your mother's corpse. She's not dead, Pip said firmly. She's healing. The humans saved her, Uncle Zareth. They found a way when everyone else said there wasn't one. The journey to the mining sector was tense. Zareth and his honor guard moved through the station's corridors like a force of nature, their presence making the very walls seem to vibrate with contained power. Station personnel pressed themselves against the bulkheads as the procession passed, awed by their first sight of dragons in the flesh. When they reached the chamber where Zareth lay, Zareth stopped short. His aunt looked different than when he had last seen her. The corruption veins were gone. Her scales had regained some of their natural luster, and there was a sense of peace about her that had been absent during her long illness. She appears restored, Zareth admitted grudgingly. The physical healing is progressing faster than we expected, Elena reported, consulting her medical scanners. Her cellular regeneration rates have increased dramatically since the treatment. At this rate, she should emerge from dormancy within days rather than weeks. Jake gestured to the wreckage of his improvised medical equipment. I had to jury-rig everything from spare parts and equipment that was never designed for this kind of work. But the principles are sound. With proper resources and time to develop the techniques, this treatment could help other dragons suffering from similar conditions. Zareth studied the chaotic array of human technology and dragon anatomy, trying to understand how such a crude-looking setup could have succeeded where sophisticated dragon medicine had failed. Explain the process, Zareth commanded. I must understand how this was accomplished. For the next hour, Jake and Elena walked the Dragon Lord through every step of their treatment. They showed him the cascade failure patterns in the corruption, explained how they had used electromagnetic overload to force a neural reset, and demonstrated how human quantum computing principles had been adapted for biological systems. Throughout the explanation, Zareth asked increasingly technical questions. Despite his initial hostility, it became clear that he possessed a keen intellect and genuine scientific curiosity. More importantly, Jake could see the exact moment when Zareth's worldview began to shift. The fundamental approach is collaborative rather than hierarchical, Elena concluded. Instead of trying to overpower the corruption with superior magic or technology, Jake found a way to work with your aunt's natural healing abilities. Collaborative, Zareth mused. This concept is unfamiliar to dragon methodology. Maybe that's why it worked, Pip suggested. Mother always said that dragons could learn from other species if we stopped trying to conquer them long enough to listen. Zareth was quiet for a long moment, studying his aunt's peaceful form. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of uncertainty that none of them had heard before. If what you have accomplished here is truly possible, he said slowly, then many of our fundamental assumptions about species superiority may require examination. Before anyone could respond, a familiar mental voice filled the chamber. About time you figured that out, nephew. Zareth's consciousness was stronger now, her mental presence warm and amused. Though her body remained in dormancy, her awareness had clearly been following the entire conversation. Aunt Zareth, Zareth said, dropping to one knee in a gesture of respect that surprised everyone present. We believed you were beyond saving. I was by dragon standards, Zareth replied, but young Pip refused to accept those limitations. She found humans who were willing to approach an impossible problem with impossible solutions. Jake felt a strange sense of pride mixed with humility. He'd spent his career fixing things that others had given up on, but this was the first time his work had prevented an interstellar war and challenged the fundamental beliefs of an entire species. The Empire will need to hear of this, Zareth said finally. If humans possess capabilities that complement our own, perhaps the relationship between our species requires reconsideration. Perhaps, Zareth agreed. But first I believe you owe these humans a debt of gratitude. They have given us something more valuable than medical treatment. They have shown us a new way of thinking about problems that seem unsolvable. As the dragons began discussing the political implications of human medical capabilities, Jake quietly gathered his tools. He had one more impossible repair to tackle, rebuilding his equipment well enough to monitor Zareth's recovery. But for the first time in months, he was working on a machine that was getting better instead of breaking down, and somehow that made all the difference in the galaxy.